At this point, you have spent one class period drawing in your landscape on canvas paper and one class period practicing how to use acrylic paint by creating a value scale going from dark, medium to light. Our next step is to start thinking about how we are planning on painting this project. First, remember, this is paint. So you might want to look at your landscape drawing and see if there are any shapes or objects that you can simplify. That way it'll be easier to paint. Small or detailed drawings will need to be erased and drawn larger with less detail. So you can see here in my tree, I simplified the leaves and kind of turned it all into one shape. I simplified the mountain into one shape, and I simplified the grass and flowers that were in my picture into one shape. It's almost like a silhouette where only the outside lines or information is drawn, and there's really no inner information or details drawn. Kind of reminds me of like a shadow almost. Pause the video here if you have some drawings that need to be reworked on your canvas paper before we get started into paint. Once your landscape has been simplified and you think it is ready for the painting stage, we now want to number our layers so that we can know how many tints and shades of paint we are going to be using. Now, what I mean by layers is here you can see I have numbered the different parts of my landscape. Imagine if you are walking into this landscape, whatever is the closest to you as the viewer would be the part that is darkest and bigger, and whatever is the furthest from you would be lighter and smaller. So in this image, I imagine walking up to this landscape, and the very first thing would be at the bottom, my grass. So I layered that as number 1, okay? Then if I were to continue walking past the grass, I would hit my tree, since my tree is behind my grass. So my tree is number 2. Then I would come across the buildings, so I layered that number 3. Then I would go to the mountain, which is 4. Then the water in the background is furthest away, so that is 5. And the very last is the sky, which is the furthest away, number 6. So now that I've numbered my landscape, I know that number 1 of my landscape is going to be the darkest shade of my color. Shades are the dark sides of your color. So your main color, which in my case is green with a little bit of black. So from here, here, and here, these are all shades of green. Tints of green are the color mixed with white. So these are all tints of my color. So I can see that with these numbers that I now have on my drawing, I can see that I'm going to have 6 different shades and tints of green. Pause here to put numbers on your landscape and see how many layers of your landscape you will have. Once you have all of your numbered layers in your landscape, you are now ready to paint with acrylic paint. Remember, the goal is to create an atmospheric perspective by having the things that are closer in your image that larger and darker, and things that are further away in your image lighter and smaller. My best advice is to start with the bottom layer, number 1, and work your way up to the top, which is going to be your highest number. The bottom layer is going to be the darkest shade of your painting, which has mostly black with a little bit of your main color, which in my case is green. You can see in my image here that I have already painted in my first and second layers, My first one is the darkest shade of green. My second one is a little bit lighter, where it has a little bit of black, but mostly green. And as I continue now, my next step is to paint in number 3. So here, I want it to be slightly lighter than my step 2, but still not super, super bright. So I'm going to take my green, and I'm going to add just a little bit of white. My first layer was all mostly black with a little bit of green. My second layer was mostly green, barely any black. Now I'm moving on to my neutral green and adding just a little touch of white to make it a little bit lighter. When you are painting in the parts of your landscape, you need to make sure you are taking your time so that you can stay inside the edges of your shapes and keeping your edges nice and crisp and clean. Remember, craftsmanship. You want to make sure that your project is neat and clean. If you notice that your color, like you can see it here in mine, this green and this green look very similar. So I'm going to add a little bit more white so that I can notice a difference between these layers. Still taking care to stay inside my lines. Slowly filling up each section. If you make a mistake, maybe you go outside the line or you paint the wrong shade or tint, don't worry too much about it. Just move on to a different part of your painting, let it dry. You can always paint back over it again later when it's dry. Acrylic paint is very forgiving that way. So there I have one building. So my next building here behind the tree is going to be the same color because those are both part of my same layer. So I'm going to continue this green color that is slightly lighter in my brush and use it to fill in this building as well. One thing I do want to make sure to mention is that once you've got some white in your brush, you never want to have white and black in your brush at the same time. So you should only either have your color with black or your color with white on your brush. If you ever have your color with black and white on your brush, you're just going to get a gray. You're going to get a gray version of your color, and it's not going to look as good. It won't look correct. And there we have the next section of my layers filled in. So I've got my dark already done, which is mostly black with a little bit of green. Then I've got my second layer that is mostly green with only a little bit of black. And then I have my next layer, which is green with just a touch of white. Now I would be ready to move on to my mountain, which is number 4, by adding even more white to my green. And then moving on to 5 by adding more white to my green. And to number 6 being the lightest, maybe possibly this light of green. You can use your value strip if you want next to your project like I did to kind of get a hang of how dark, medium, and light your layers should be.